Hi everyone, so in this video we will be setting up the front end part. For a change, I will now start integrating this transaction endpoint with, so now we can see how we can use this endpoint. So let's just open the assignment first. So just to check the design, this is a search field and a drop down to select the month, and then we have a table with some other details like page number. There is these two buttons, next and previous, so that is for pagination, and per page we have to show how many items. So let's get started with it. So first of all, what I'll do here is I'll set up the React project. So I'll just do npm create. So I'm using white or wheat to set up a project. So I'm going to give it a folder of client, and in the template I'm saying that we are going to use React. So just press enter, cd client, and I'll just follow the instructions given here, npm install. So as we can see, the installation is completed. So now we will run the next command, npm run dev. So we have the server running here. Let's go to this. So we have our app up and running. Now we can start working with this code. So I'll just use VS Code for this one. Usually I use NeoVim for most of my coding part. I'm going to use it for React. That will make a lot of things easier for us. So I'll just go to the app.jsx. So this is our app component that is being displayed here. What I'll do here is I'll just clear this thing. So now we have a clear slate, so we can start working here. I'll also remove the CSS. So all of this CSS should go, and also CSS inside index to delete that as well. So now we have a white page. Now we'll start building our design. So if you can see the design here, we have this field called search transaction that will be of type input. Let's just start with it. So I'll just move it side by side so we can see both. So inside app JSX, I'm going to give it a HTML component that will say transaction dashboard, so just to check live reload and everything is working fine. Now we will give one section. So we'll give a div here, and inside this div, what we are going to do, we are going to give a input field, and the input type will be text here. Also I'll give it as a placeholder that will be search transactions, something like that, and also here the value. So we'll define the value in just a second, and we also need a on change here. So whenever someone types in here, we can capture that value. So for the search part, what we are going to do, we are going to define one state here. So inside this code, I'm going to give it a search input and then set search input use state. So initially this is just empty, and now we have to give these values. So this will be search input and this will be a function. So that function we will just provide here. We'll create an arrow function that will be search input change handler. So here I'll get the event. So inside this event, I'll simply just do set search input and e dot target dot value. So that will capture whatever we have typed inside the search input. So I'll just give this handler here, search change handler. So now this code is working fine, and what I will do is just to show that this value is changing, I'll give a use effect here. So inside this use effect, I'll give it a search input. So whenever search input value changes, I'm just going to log it. So let's see if this code is working fine or not. So I'll just open the console and I'll type hi. So we can see the value is changing here. So this part is working fine. Now we also want to have a drop down. So let's start working that part. So in order to give a drop down, we will use the select tag. So inside select, what all details do we need? I'll just see here. So inside select, we need a value again, and we also need a on change here as well. So first we will define these states and handlers. So I'll just say const selected option and set selected option, which will be use state. And for now I'm not giving it a default value, so I'll just provide this here, selected option, and inside on change we need another handler. So I'll just copy this one and change the name, select option handler, and set selected right. So I'll give a set select option handler, right? So we can see a drop down here, but there are no values in the drop down for now. Now in order to give values, we have to define those values as a constant. So what I will do is outside this component, I am going to define a constant that will be options. So it will be an array of objects. So this array of object will contain two things, value and a text. Text will be something like the month, the Jan January, the shorthand for that Jan. Then another value will be like 2 and Feb. So I'll just quickly fill it up. So I have filled all the values. Now what I will do is I can use this to show the drop down. So I'll move to the drop down bar, and here inside this select tag, what I'll do is I'll just do options dot map, and here I'll get one option. What I'll do here is I'll just return other option. So I'll define an option. So inside select, you have to give option so you can show the drop downs. So inside option, I'm going to give it a value that will be option dot value, and a key that will be option dot value as well. And the text that I want to show is will be option dot. So now if I see, by default we have Jan selected and we have all these options. So that is fine. So what else we can do here? So I also want to log whenever we change this, just to show you guys. So I'll change right now. So I'll create one more use effect, and inside this I'll just console log month selection changed, and that will be selected option. And inside the dependency array I'll give it selected option. So now whenever we change the option, we get the value here. So this part is almost done, and we can start working with our table. So for the table part, outside this div, we're going to give a table tag here, and we are going to give the header part, then row, and we are going to define multiple table headers. So we want ID here, and we want a couple of other fields that I'll just get and just paste here. So I have defined all the fields that we need. We have them here. Next we want to define the body of the table, so that will be body, and inside this what we want is we want to show the data. Currently we don't have the data, so we have to fetch that data via an API call. So how we can do it? And one more thing that we are forgetting is that in the requirements it was given that month by default should be March, so we will have to fix that. So in order to fix that, what I'll do here is in the selected option, so initially what I'll say is that I want to get the second one. So the second one is like this one, since this is 0 index, so we get this one, option 2, and we will set the value here. So now by default we are getting March. Now what we want to do is we want to fetch the data that we want to display inside this table. So we can start with it. So I'll just define a function here, so const fetch data, and since we are going to make an API call, so I know this function will be async. Now what I want is I will get the URL here. So the URL will consist of two parts. One will be the base URL. So the base URL will be defined as a constant outside, and I'll give it as http://localhost, and the port is 3000. And in this URL I'm going to use that base URL, and with that I'm going to append the endpoint that will be transactions, and offset will be some value. So offset for now I'm hard coding here as 1, and the limit that will be also some other constant value, but for now I'm hard coding it as 2, and the month will be equal to the selected option, so whatever value we are getting from the drop down. And then the search one will be, search parameter is going to be the search input. So this should work fine, and what we can do is we can call this const response will be await. We are going to use fetch, and on this URL we are going to fetch the data. Then I'm going to set result equal to response.json, and this also will be await, and we are going to get the JSON here. Then just going to do a console log, and that will be the result. Now let's refresh the page, and on page load we are not getting any data because we haven't called this API yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create another use effect, and whenever the page renders, page mounts, we are going to make this API call. So I'm going to give a use effect here. This is our function, and inside this I'm going to call fetch date. So we are getting a course error here. So one thing that we will have to do on our server part, I'll just open the server code, and inside index.js I haven't given the course thing to allow making requests from some other origin. So I'll just provide that right now. So what I'll do is I'll just install course here, npm I course, and I'll use it here. So first I'll do course equal to require course, and this course we are going to give inside when we are doing app.use. So app.use, okay, so we have to provide that app.use. So we are going to give this middleware so we can allow request from like different origin. This should work fine. Now I'll just restart the server, although we don't have to do that part. So I'll just restarted the server, and if I open my code, let's refresh this page, and we are getting some data. So we are getting the data here. So this API call is working fine. Now what we have to do is we have to capture this result, and then we have to use it in some way. So I'll do here set data. Currently we don't have any data state. I'll just do data and set data will be use state. Initially it is empty, and what I'll do is set the data as this result. So we have the data now, and we can use it inside the body. So in order to use it inside the body, what we have to do is data dot response. So response, because we are getting it inside this. If I do raw data here, this is the key, and I'll do pretty print. So response, so we are going to get that key response, and that is an array then. So we can map on that one, and I'll just say data row, and here we will return this thing. So I'll just return a tr tag here. We have to give it a key, that is important. So data row dot, we have an id, so I can use that one. So we can see we have this id and this Mongo id as well. We can use either of that, but I'm just preferring this id, that is a product id. So now I can give the data. So I'll just do data row dot title, and similarly I'll give all these fields like description, category, and everything like that. So I'll just yank it for now. So I've just added all the data, and if we zoom it out, we can see the data is coming fine. So we have the description, price, category, and images. Now one problem that we will see when we refresh the page, we get the data is undefined, and the reason for that is initially we don't have the data, since we haven't made the API call and got the data and set it as something. So we have that as null initially. So what we want is some kind of a loading animation or some kind of a loader. So until the data loads, we want to show some text, and then once the data is loaded, we want to change and show the actual table. So I'll just do that part. So I'm going to define a state, and that will be is loading, and then set is loading function use state, and initially I can give it true. So since that page is loading, we are making this API call of fetch data, and inside this API call, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set is loading true and false. So I'm going to change that state. So I'll say set is loading as true here, and then what I'll do here is once we have set the data, I'm going to say set is loading as false. So now if I reload, we are getting the same error because we are not using this loading anywhere. So I'm going to use that. So in here, what I'll do is I'll do conditional rendering. So is loading, if that is true, then I'm going to show it this data. Otherwise, what I'll do is simply show empty data in table. You can go in for some kind of fancy loading, but for a simple solution, I'm going to do this. So now if I reload, we are still getting data is undefined. I'll just check it. So if I check, the API is working fine, I guess, right? That's looking fine. And inside this, if I see we have any error, is loading is true initially, then we do set is loading true and set is loading false, and do this. And one thing that I'm noticing is we are not getting this result log. So I'll just clear it for now, this log. I'll just do clear, and if I reload it again, so we are getting this error in line 89. Okay, so we have changed on this thing, so that should have changed, but just restart my front end and reload it again, and we are getting the same error. Okay, so I have inverted this condition. So if not loading, then we want to show this empty one, otherwise we are going to show this data. So this was the error here. Now that is fixed, and if I just reload the page, we are getting all the data. And initially, if you can see, we are getting like empty table. I can also show you by going over to network tab, and here I'll just do like regular 3G just for throttling it. And when the page is loading, we can see it is making API request. That is like too quick. See, so I'll do good 2G, maybe that. So when the page is loading, you can see there was a slight moment when the table was empty. So now I have disabled the cache and I'm doing reload. So I'll just change it to regular 3G. Maybe that will change it. And here if we see, that was empty. So I'll just change it back to no throttling, and this seems fine. Now what else do we need here? So this data part is done, I guess, and now we want to add the pagination controls. So in order to add the pagination controls, if I go back to the design, we want to show this page number, next and previous button, and per page count. So I guess per page count 1 one will be like simple enough. So I'll first crack the design here. So I'll give underneath this table, I'll give another div and I'll give it a class called pagination. And in here what we want is we want to show a span text that will be page number. We'll just say 1, so we get this page number 1 here. Inside the div, it's another span that will be I'll give it a class name pagination next, and on click we want to do pagination next handler, something like this. So I'll create this function. Currently we don't have this one, and inside this I'll give next. We will create one more. This will be pagination previous, and this will be pagination previous handler, and here I'll say previous. And if I see here, I'll just create this method and that will get an event, I guess. I'll just do console log that event for now, and I'll give one more function here. So instead of next, I want here prev, and this should work fine. So we can see this is going in like different line. So we'll give some CSS here. So if I go inside app.css, I'll give some CSS to the pagination class that we have defined, and that will be display as flex since we want it in same line. Justify content will be space between. So now we have space between these content, but they're like shifting to the right hand side. We will fix that in a while. I'll just give margin left as 30 pixel, margin right as 100 pixel, margin top as 20 pixel. This looks nice. I'll also define a few more CSS classes, so I'll just define them and then explain it to you. So here is all the CSS that we have defined. So you can take a look at this one, and it will be pretty easy to understand if you know CSS. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining this CSS. So I'll just go back to the coding part, and here what we want to give, we also want to give a separator that was in between here. So this is this minus separator. I'll give that one, and in order to give that, I'm going to create one more span between here. So I'll say span, and class name will be pagination separator. I'll just change here and do a minus. That seems fine. And on the right hand side we want to show per page. I'll give one more span here that will be per page, and that will be equal to limit. So that is currently, so we have knocked down the design, and we have this next. When we are creating clicking this next, we are getting some event trigger. Now what I want to do is I want to define a few states for this page. So this should be a state. So I'll just give it page here, and I'll define the state. And initially we are on page number 1. You can do page 0. Page 1 seems fine, I guess. So I'll just do page 1 here. So I'll just see if that makes a difference if I make it 0 or 1. And inside this offset now I'm going to give it as page. So if I do page 0, we get the same elements, and on 1 also we get same. When I make it 2, it goes to the next page. So initially it should be equal to 1. So now we are using this page here, and if we are going next, nothing is happening for now. So what effectively we want is when we are creating clicking the next button, so we want to go to the next page. So on this next handler, what I will do is I will do set page to page plus 1. If I do next here, we are going here, this per page is changing, which is wrong. This should be a limit, so I'll define a limit variable here that will be a constant, and I'm going to give it a value of 2 for now. And here this limit I'll change as using that constant limit. This is also limit, and if we change here, here I'll give page. Right, so now if I clicking next, the page is changing but the content is not changing, which is not correct. So in order to fix that, whenever we are changing the page, we also want to make this API call. So I'll define one more use effect here, and this should trigger when we are changing the page for now, and this should do fetch data. Now if I change this to next, we are getting this, but this is not triggering because this is not in. So now I think it should be working fine. So on previous we don't have anything, so next it is working. So for previous we simply will do set page -1, and one sanity check that we want on page -1 is if the page is equal to 1, then just return it. We don't want it to be 0 or negative. So we go previous, we get this data. This seems to be working fine, but there is one issue in this code. So just try to pause the video and think what is the issue here. So if I click next one more time, we are going to page 3, but there is no data. Then next. So it is making all those API calls, and if we know there is no data on that page, we shouldn't allow it to go to the next page to spam those API calls. So we want to save those API calls, and if I go to previous, that is working fine. So from 1 we are not going to 0 or negative. So now we want to save these API calls and have the correct behavior here. So for that I'll define one more state here, and the state will be is last page. So we will have a state is last page, that is last page use state, and initially I'm going to say that this is not the last page, so this value will be false. And inside the fetch data, what I'm going to do is, if it is last page, then don't make any API call, just early return from here. Otherwise what we want to do is, we also want to do a check where we are setting that if it is the last page or not. So here, after setting the data, what we are going to do is, we are saying if result dot response, well, just do question mark dot, because that can be null as well, and length is greater than 0, then what we are going to do is, we are going to set the data. So if the length is greater than 0, we are going to set the data. Otherwise what we are going to say is, this is last page, set is last page as true. What we want to do is, we want to undo this change as well, where we are increasing the page. So we want to do set is last page as the current value of page -1. I'll show you why this is important. So I'll just comment this for now, and then you will know why it is important. So now we are getting some data. We click next, we have some data. We click next again, we come to this page number 3. Now we will click next again. So it is changing the page, but you can see there are no API calls being made after that. So one thing we want to do here is, we don't want to change this page if it is the last page. So here inside pagination next handler, I'll say set so is last page. If that is true, I'll just do an early return here. Refresh the page, next. So now after 3 it is not changing, but that is also incorrect. It should have been 2 here. So on page 2 we have only one content. If I press next, this should have been 2. So in order to do that, what we are doing here is, when we are setting the last page, we are also saying that set page should be decreased by 1. So now if I change it, go to next, we get 2 here. Go to next again, we get a API call, and we get empty data. So we say set is last page is true, and page number is 2 again, since we did this page minus. So one more thing that I should do is moving all this code inside try catch. So in case we get any error in this API, or while converting the response to JSON, we can catch that and work around. So I'm just going to wrap this code. That should be from here, try and catch this thing inside an error, and I'll just do console.error failed to fetch table data. That will be the error log. And what we are going to do is, we are also going to mark that set is loading is. So ideally we want to show the error here, but for now I'm just setting the set is loading false, so we will get an empty table whenever we get an error from the API. Now we want to do a few more thing here. So for this search transaction, I think this isn't working fine right now. So if I like type something, press enter, there is no like filtering based on that. So we want to change that. And one more thing that I have noticed is, okay, so this doesn't seem to be working. Okay, if I change it and reload the page, now if I go on next, we are getting data, and this seems fine. So now whenever we are changing the value of this, we want to make an API call as well. So for that, it will be pretty straightforward. And what I'll do here is, I'll add one more dependency here with page. I'm going to give one more dependency, that is search input. So now if I type something, so let's say I type this, we should be making that API call, but the search input also we are giving. Let me see what isn't working fine here. So if I give this thing like shutdown search for that, so we are getting the data here. So this seems to be working fine. If I erase it, we get all the data. One more error is when we are changing the month, the data isn't refreshing or something like that. So what I want to do is, whenever we are changing the month, we also have to make this API call. So I'll just add it inside this dependency selected option. So now if I change this, we can see we are able to change the data. And if I make like some kind of a search, so I'll search for USB here, we are getting this seems to be working fine. So this works fine. And one thing that we are forgetting, I guess, is when we are doing this set previous thing, so I'll just try to re-trigger that behavior. So I'll do next, then do next again, and then if I do previous, we are seeing that this page is changing but the data is not changing, and that is because we have a bug here. So we are setting this is last page true, and if it is the last page, we are not making the API call. But what we want is, if we are going to the previous page, so we want to make sure that here we are saying that set is last page is false. So this is not the last page, we have like refresh, move back one page. So if I go next, page 2, next, nothing happens. Previous, we go to page 1 and data changes. And if I just try to play around here, let's say I go to next, I go to September. So we are showing page 2 here. Ideally what we should do is, when we are changing the month, we want to reset this to page 1. So this can be an exercise for you. You can try to think how you can reset these things like this page to 1, since that will be more of a desirable behavior, and also how we can handle things like this. So this data is like huge, and this can also be huge. So in case of January, this is like huge, so we want to show like some characters and then put like ellipses in front of that. So all those small like edge cases that you can think of, you can try to work it. Otherwise we will do it in the upcoming videos. So that's all for this video. We are able to do the search part as well here, which is working like fine. So this will be getting like polyester here, and if I go to next and previous, I'll just refresh this, and here if I go to May and I'll search for PS4 here, we are getting this result. Now if I go to next or previous, we are able to stay on this page. And if I delete this thing, one thing that I'm noticing is we are not making any API call here, and I have to reload this page. So so that seems like some other issue. And yeah, so that is it for the video, and in the next video we are going to work on the stats API and other interesting part. And that is all for this video. If you like the video, do hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.